than somebody else from the early part of the last century. And that would continue clear into the 1960s. And really starting in the 50s, though, you began to see a regional appeal to motorsports. On the West Coast in Southern California, you had the NHRA, which was already established. In the early part of the last century, they were already racing at Indianapolis. In the Southwest, during this time period, you'd begin to see stock car racing and the formation of NASCAR. Three factors were critical in that expansion of stock car racing in the Southeast, and specifically NASCAR. Promotion of the sport, participants who would appeal to the general public, as well as support from manufacturers and advertisers. For stock car racing, it really formed out of the days of Prohibition. Well, the expansion did. You had bootleggers who really wanted to prove they were quicker than the next guy because, well, they were already quicker than the police if they managed to get to the racetrack. A lot of the moonshiners throughout the Carolinas were being banned from racing at the local tracks. This resulted in other promoters in other areas seeking out these moonshiners to bring them in to increase their ticket gate to try to make more money for themselves. One of those promoters that made that effort to bring in the moonshiners was Bill France Sr. Bill France Sr. was a race promoter at Daytona Beach, and he would go on to found NASCAR in 1948. He would continue his promotion primarily on short tracks throughout the Southeast, normally tracks around a half mile on dirt. In 1950, he would try to promote his first race on asphalt. That race took place at the Darlington Raceway. The race purse for that day was $25,000. After the success of that event, France made a bold effort to propose a 2.5-mile venue in Daytona Beach. This track would go on to be the Daytona International Speedway. It was approved by the Board of Commerce in 1955. After proposing the track, he ran into some financial issues. The bond market would fall out, which was going to ruin his efforts. To continue to build the track, he chose to sell stock in the company so he could complete his project. He was pretty confident in his ability to complete the project, so in 1958, he declared the last races would be run on Daytona Beach on the sand. In early 1959, the track opened, with the first track activity coming from Marshall Teague. Teague went out to set the closed course speed record of 177 miles per hour. Teague's efforts failed. While running, he had a malfunction. The car would flip, he was ejected from the vehicle, and he would die of his injuries. This was just weeks before the scheduled first Daytona 500. The first Daytona 500 was held in February of 1959. The race was well attended and received national attention for its photo finish. Johnny Beauchamp was declared the winner on race day. Lee Petty, who was declared runner-up, would protest that race. 3 days later, a photo from a fan would come out and would be submitted to NASCAR, and the finish was reversed. In the photo here, the 42 car is Lee Petty. The car on the top of the track is a car that's one lap down, and the 73 on the bottom is Johnny Beauchamp. This is the photo that would reverse the finishing order. This photo gained national attention, and national attention for the sport, which would lead to more media coverage across the country. The article, or the AP released in the New York Times, the reversal of the finishing order. In 1963, National Speed Sport News published an article questioning the morals of the drivers, based back on the time of the moonshiners who were racing. This would alter what the image of a driver should be. The idea that a driver needed to be clean-cut, more business savvy, and more public-friendly. The first driver to really break that mold was Ned Jarrett. He was the 1961 NASCAR Grand National Series champion. Upon winning his championship, he went to speech school, realizing that as champion, it was his role to be a representative for the sport. He would go on, after winning his championship, to be a public speaker for local events and at local schools. He would retire in 1966 and go on to have a successful career in radio and TV, covering the sport in which he participated. Another driver critical in the changing of the sport was Fast Freddie Lorenzen. Lorenzen was from a Chicago suburb, breaking the southern mold of a driver. He didn't race for championships, but instead chose the high-paying races and raced for money. He would go on to have 26 career wins and would also be the first driver to have a management company handle his career. The management company that handled his career was the same that was handling IndyCar drivers A.J. Foyt, Roger Ward, and Parnelli Jones. The third driver I'm going to speak about, and probably the best known, was Richard Petty. Richard Petty was from North Carolina and would go on to be known as the king of the sport. He was made to attend college by his father before he was allowed to race. In 1958, he would make his debut in the sport at 21 years old. Petty's debut was a humble debut, to say the least. He qualified 13th and would finish 6th. In 1961, he would become the lead driver for the team his father had founded, Petty Enterprise, when his father could no longer race regularly due to injuries he had sustained over the years. Petty's impact on the sport was great, especially in the 1960s. He would go on to have 2 Daytona 500 wins, he would win 2 Grand National Series championships, and amass 101 wins. The signature you see on the right side is the signature he adapted while his father made him go to college. And that signature would become famous, and he still signs it that way to this very day. After the 1960s, Petty would go on to have a total of 200 career wins, 7 Daytona 500 wins, 7 Premier Series championships, and in 1972 would establish a relationship with STP Fuel Treatments, which that relationship exists to this day. That car is actually being raced this weekend in Martinsville, Virginia. Along with the drivers and the promotion of the sport, a key was the support of manufacturers and advertising. This ad, which was distributed by Chrysler to the New York Times and the Chicago Daily Tribune, as well as other papers across the country, features Lee Petty on the beach at Daytona. This ad was posted in 1954, well ahead of the time in which NASCAR was considered national. Another ad here was in 1963, was posted by Mercury, featuring, though you can't read it, race winners at locations, including NASCAR races as well as USAC. And similarly, you would see another ad here in 1969 for the Plymouth Fury, in which NASCAR, they announced, had sanctioned their test of safety, including brakes and performance. All of these elements would ultimately push NASCAR into the national scene through the 60s and well into the 70s. This would continue well into the 80s, and now NASCAR has their national TV deals, national radio deals, satellite radio deals. All of this without the involvement of these drivers, as well as these advertisers, and the promotion of Bill France and the France family allowed the sport to grow to where it is today. Thank you.